Right? The far majority of students who I talk to who have a 4.0, who have 520 plus MCAT scores, don't have any clinical experience. And you have a ton, it's just confusing. Application Renovation Season 4, Episode 21. How are you doing today?
Good.
Yeah? You excited?
Yeah.
You nervous?
Excited. Yeah.
Let's talk about your application in terms of nuts and bolts. First application cycle, second application cycle, where are we with that? And number of interviews, waitlist rejections, what does that look like?
Yeah. So this was my first application cycle. I got 2 interviews. I'm on one wait list and then 1 rejection.
2 interviews, 1 wait list, 1 rejection.
Correct.
Okay. Any news on the wait list? What's the odds of coming in on that wait list now that we're kind of in the first week of June here?
Yeah. I'm thinking that it's a low chance. I think I've been looking at the stats for this school. I think they typically accept like 50%, but it is getting kind of late. So I've already submitted like my reapplication.
Okay.
So that's where I can.
You already submitted. How are you going to integrate the feedback from this?
I know. I didn't expect to come on here, honestly. But I mean, I'm great. I'm glad that I did.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you did, because these are amazing learning opportunities for students who watch. So thank you for your vulnerability and transparency to help someone. So right off the bat, I'm gonna spoil the surprise. 4.0, 521. These are my favorite ones because students are like, how do you not get in with a 4.0, 521? I'm like, surprise, it's not just about stats. And so we're going to take a look at your application and see potentially where things went wrong, although I'm not sure they went wrong anywhere. But we'll find out. We'll see. All right, let's go ahead and dive in to your application. Actually, I want to hear your feedback first.
Yeah. So I can have like 3 points here as to why I think the application cycle didn't go well.
Okay.
First of all, I think my school list was really limiting. I might have applied to too many like top schools.
Okay.
Another thing was the secondaries. I started a full-time job right around secondaries, and I didn't really pre-write. So I was getting the secondaries in pretty late, about like a month after I first got them.
Okay.
And then the third, I mean, the writing can always be better. I think I did a lot of storytelling. Like I've watched a lot of application renovation in your videos. So I did a lot of storytelling, but maybe I could have shifted it a little bit to where it's not just telling other people's stories, but telling my story through their interactions instead.
Yes, definitely. Okay, cool. So good ones. School lists, I think, is always kind of an overhyped. Like, ooh, I didn't get in because of my school list. Reddit and Student Doctor Network love jumping on those types of things. But we'll take a look and see. Definitely turning secondaries around in a month is definitely going to be a big question mark of whether or not that impacted a school's reaction to you to go, well, it took him a month to send his secondary in. Is he really that interested in us? With a 4.0 and a 521 MCAT, I'm sure he probably was focusing on other schools, and it is going to be just fine. So we're not going to interview him because he obviously doesn't like us because it took him so long to submit a secondary. So that definitely could be a reaction there. And then writing can always be better, and we'll take a look at that.
Okay.
All right, let's go ahead and jump into application. First thing I love pointing out, when did you apply? You applied within the first week or so, so no issues there. You can see it took still 3 weeks to get verified, which is crazy. As we look through demographic information, all redacted out, speaking a few different languages, which is always great. Not applying as disadvantaged, not being calculated as disadvantaged here based on parent, education, and occupation. No red flags, no military service, so demographic-wise, no issues. we get to grades. I already mentioned 4.0, 528, so we can scroll through these grades, and you can see the 4.0, and I said 528. I meant 521. Although we did have a 4.0, 528 student on a couple episodes ago who also did not get an acceptance. So we jump first to clinic coordinator, medical assistant, and scribe. I'm interested to know, you mark this as medical clinical. Clinical coordinator to me is not medical clinical, but you do have medical assistant and scribe here. I'd be interested to know, in a big question mark, well, what are the percentages of each of these? If you're marking this as medical clinical, like, is this 75% of your job and 25% is medical assistant and scribe? Like, what's the breakdown there?
Yeah, so clinic coordinator, I guess that was just a job title. What I really did was medical assistant and scribe. So most of the time was dedicated to being a medical assistant. And then when we ran clinics, I would scribe for those.
Okay, great. So on your new one, which it's too late because you already submitted, I would have not put clinic coordinator, because that just adds confusion.
I see.
Right? Clinic coordinator to me is more of a managerial role. And so if you really were just a medical assistant and scribe, just put medical assistant and scribe as the experience name.
Okay.
Right? And there's always this concern of like, well, if they call and they say, hey, this student says he was a medical assistant and scribe, they're going to go, no, he was the clinic coordinator. Like, they're not going to argue that. Right? So, and it's not going to be an issue. So just some confusion, I think, that doesn't need to be there. And then you basically hacked the system, which I don't know why students did this. It's not an issue moving forward now with the new AMCAS ability to do completed hours and anticipated hours. I'm assuming that's why you broke it up like this. You did it for a lot of different activities. AMCAS doesn't tell you to do this. I don't know why students do it, but with the new AMCAS settings, you don't have to worry about that anymore. So, so this, obviously lots of hours, kind of full-time job arena. So plenty of clinic hours. And then we look at the storytelling, the activity description, most meaningful. And we saw, kind of looking at this, you have kind of the role that you went through. Dealing with this patient, Mike, you're contacting the authorization coordinator, messaging the surgery scheduler, another authorization coordinator, and figuring out what's going on. These kind of generic takeaways for me are where a lot of the distraction comes in, right? Showed me the teamwork and attention to detail that delivering quality patient requires. To me, that's just another way of saying, hey, I'm a good team player and I have really good attention to detail. Like, you're bragging without bragging, right? Selling without selling. So I just, for me, again, this is my style. There are other advisors that recommend differently. For me, we don't need to go there. So I think having that authorization coordinator, scheduler, authorization coordinator, having that story in there, I think is fine. What did that look like? And like, maybe joking, like how many phone calls you're making every day for this kind of stuff, just how crazy it is, I think would have been perfectly fine, showing what that role is. The big thing that I always have here, and this is where some of the confusion comes in, is I see clinic coordinator, and that makes sense for this description because you're not showing clinical interaction here, right? Sure, maybe some medical assistants do this, but there are clinic coordinators, right? Care coordinators that do this work, that are calling and getting prior auths and calling the schedulers and doing all of that stuff. So I read this description and went immediately to, well, is this actually clinical experience? Because this doesn't sound like clinical experience. This sounds like an admin job. Okay? So that's where some confusion came in, why I asked you that question to begin with. So then we keep going. You have here about your directly responsible for the well-being of patients, up to you to ensure that they receive the care they needed. That's a little narcissistic, I think. right? It's like, I alone can deliver high quality care. Like, were there not physicians or PAs or other people there doing the work? So a little bit ahead of yourself, I think, with that statement. And then going to this patient and the story about calling and pleading her case. Again, I see this more as admin work. You're a care coordinator here. So I think potentially focusing on the wrong angle here, especially with how you had this listed as a clinic coordinator, makes me question, is this truly clinical experience or is this not? And then again, just the focus on the sales pitch here, right? Demonstrated the importance of taking care of patients. Trust, I typically have students try to stay away from in terms of what they're focusing on. Showed me these learning statements, right? Demonstrated, showed me, learned that, taught me. The episode prior to this one, all of the takeaways for the student in the activity section were basically taught me. And the goal for me of the application is not show me everything you have learned, which is what this is focused on. It's show me who you are. That's it. Okay. So I would have loved to see why this experience was so fulfilling for you that you marked it as a most meaningful. You've used it as a, hey, this experience taught me a lot, so I'm going to tell you everything it taught me. Okay? So very, very common mistake that students make there. Bearded dragon owner. So this one was a little bit weird, a little bit interesting. Great. I love to see hobbies and different things. I have no problem with this being marked as the most meaningful. I have no problem with putting hobbies like this in an application. So I thought it was fine. So we'll keep going. We have medical clinical here. We have the role is to check in patients for their chemotherapy treatments. Now, I read this the first time as my role was to check on patients during their chemotherapy patients. And then I reread it and I'm like, oh no, check in patients. Again, that's not clinical experience. That's admin experience. Okay. Clinical experience is interacting with patients in some sort of medical clinical way to be there to support them, to give them emotional support, physical support, not necessarily like poking them with needles and that kind of stuff. The admin stuff, like, hey, can I have your insurance card? Hey, blah, blah, blah. Like emergency department registration people. They go into the patient room typically, right? The patient's brought back, the physician, the nurses, et cetera, are checking on the patient. And then the registration comes in with their computer and it's like, okay, give me your insurance and give me this information and give me that information and who's the contact person. And lots of students put that as clinical experience. And for me, it's not. It's admin.
I think, yeah. So maybe I should have clarified. By check-in, I meant like room the patients and then take their vitals is what I meant. I didn't really do the admin stuff like get their insurance and the demographics.
There you go. So see, it's very, very important to be as clear as possible, helping the reader understand what's going on, right? So check-in to me is front desk, admin, versus you are basically a medical assistant. And then the reflection here, right? Remembering the crinkle in the patient's eye as I held her bags prompts me to strive for the little acts that play a vital role in every patient's experience. That's a decent reflection. You're focusing on just what you're going to remember, what you're going to take away from this. It's not this taught me or I learned that. Potentially not focusing on the patient experience side and just remembering the patient and how important this patient was to you would have been even stronger. A lot of students like the reflection to be, here's how this is going to strengthen my ability to be a physician, which is what I think this reflection focuses on. And you don't need to go there. Just tell me why this one experience was powerful for you, impactful for you. And just remembering the crinkle in her eyes is something that I'll take forward with me. All right, we have more clinical experience here. Ended in April of 21, not a ton of hours. So I'm impressed that you marked it as the most meaningful, because it's not a lot of hours. You did it for 1 month here and then several months here. Why for this one did you think this was most meaningful to you?
So for this one, I think this was my first and kind of only time I was like in a hospital setting with patients. I rotated through 3 different departments. And so I saw a wide breadth of healthcare and also interacted with patients pretty much every day I was on shift. Okay. So yeah, this was pretty much one of the most meaningful because of what I got out of it.
What'd you get out of it?
Yeah. Just, I think I built more confidence in this role. Again, this was like my first time. So when I first joined, I was pretty nervous, talking to patients on my own and everything. But as I got through it more and more, I became more confident myself, especially in that situation.
Okay. One of the things that I try to have students realize with this most meaningful, these most meaningfuls are not most meaningful to you as a future physician, not most meaningful to you in terms of skills that you learned, but truly most meaningful to you as a human being. And obviously you have your bearded dragon hobby as a most meaningful, so I think you understood that assignment. And I wonder if potentially for this one, you kind of ignored it a little bit and wanted to put it as most meaningful for other reasons. Again, just going to total number of hours. I always question with a low number of hours, is it really most meaningful to you as a person, or is there some other angle you're trying to take care? And so you talk about rotating through oncology, physical therapy, the birth center. You were able to improve your bedside manner and built rapport with patients. And so I'm like, aha, that's why you're marking it as most meaningful. So you can show me that you have good bedside manner and good rapport / communication with patients, which again is not the goal of most meaningful. So I'll leave it at that. You have a story of the patients, and I liked the little reflection here. Right, it's just simple. I looked forward to the hey whatever each week as I visited everyone again. Right, just simple little thing that you're gonna take away from that. I like that. It's simple. It shows me you a little bit. You talk about the birth center and having little Tim go through a circumcision and stuck on your finger with the sugar and what that was like. I thought that was a nice little story here. So this one was good. I just questioned the most meaningful with the little hours. You have lab assistant here. So decent amount of hours. You were joining as a grad assistant or grad student, and talking about currently working on a follow-up project, I'm assuming is these hours here, the follow-up hours. And then just the reflection, right? What's the takeaway here? What did this mean to you? Scribe / shadow here you have for a couple months. You have this clipboard and pen in hand. You sat next to Angie, patient suffering from achalasia. And here's where I think you had mentioned earlier about showing a little bit more about who you are. And that's what I wrote here. I'm like, where are you in this story? To show your impact, to show its impact on you. You have a little bit of the, hey, we cheered, and I was glad to have followed her on her journey. To me, that's not really a reflection. I want to see kind of bigger what's your take home instead of I was happy to be a part of her journey. What did it mean to you? We have nutritionist intern, again, just a couple months here, 60 hours, talking about this journey. I wanted to know what your role was. That was what I took away from this. So I read the story. There's not a ton of reflection here, right? This list proved to be useful for Emma, and I hope for future patients as well. To me, that's not really a reflection of what it meant to you. I don't really know your role. Like, what does a nutritionist intern do? What sort of facility is this? Is that so? I'm just not sure what's going on here, other than you're interacting with this person. You have research symposium, and just a few hours there. I think it was perfectly fine with how you had it written there. Scripps Green Hospital volunteer. So again, I wrote, what is your role? I don't really know what's going on here. You jump straight into the patient, or a young woman came crying hysterically into the cancer center. Everything's falling apart, patchy hair. And again, you have a little bit of reflection. It was rewarding to see the look of relief on patients' faces, as I was able to provide an avenue to reduce the psychological effects of their battle against cancer. I don't really understand how you were able to do that, because I don't know who you are in this situation. Were you a front desk person? Were you, I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, so for both the Scripps Green Hospital and the nutritionist intern, I kind of just worked on projects within those clinics. So for the nutritionist one, I talked about the project of like getting supplements, protein supplements for them, especially since they're undergoing bariatric surgery. And for the Scripps Green one, I talked about the project where recruiting like a salon referral program for patients to get free haircuts. So that's kind of what I talked about and my role there.
I don't know. I still don't know what that role is. I know what you did, but I still don't understand the role specifically here, or this one. And you say, especially because they're going through bariatric surgery, nowhere in here does this say bariatric surgery.
Okay. Yeah.
So again, just more context, which can be done in a sentence. So more context doesn't mean give me 700 characters of job description, but just more context, right? Helping patients post-bariatric surgery, blah, 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 right? Just something simple so that I understand the role a little bit.
Okay. So just a quick sentence at the beginning to explain it real quick.
Yeah, especially these vague ones where it's like volunteer and then you like, just an intern, like what's going on? So just some explanation, right? If it was EMT, again, probably don't need a quick little sentence. We have Lab Expo Graduate Showdown Lead. I really like this one because you used a lot of numbers to show impact here, about 8 presenters and 20 volunteers, 800 attendees. It shows a lot about organizational skills, leadership skills, all of that fun stuff without you pitching those, selling those skills. Piano endeavor, artistic endeavor. Why did you put 0 for anticipated hours here?
I don't know, actually. I mean, you always get mixed advice online about what to put as your number of hours for hobbies. And I guess in this scenario, my mind just decided to take a mixed approach, because I know some people say to put 0. Some people say just put the number of hours, and I just did both, I guess.
Yeah. And to me, it's like, hey, piano was really interesting, but I'm not doing it anymore.
Yeah.
Like, I'm too busy for that. Ain't nobody got time for that. So I just thought it was really weird to see it like that. So pick one, stick with one method of doing it. So yeah, it goes either way. I think for hobbies, especially ones, and this isn't even a ton of hours. Hobbies, some people have hobbies that are like 10,000, 20,000 hours. Great. You either put it on there, and if it makes sense, if I do the math and I'm like, wait a minute, that means you're doing a hobby like 10 hours a day. How are you going to class and working full time? Like, obviously it needs to make sense. But I don't see an issue with 3,000 hours and then, hey, over the course of the next year, I'm probably going to do another 300 to 400 hours, because once a week I sit down and I just play the piano for a couple hours, whatever that math works out to. So, but when you have hours previously, and then again, your hacked kind of anticipated hours method here showing 0, you're basically saying, I'm not doing anymore. That's
yeah, I can see that.
So I'm like, oh, okay, whatever. You don't want to play the piano anymore. That's yours. I don't care. And then I think good good description here. You didn't try to use like playing the piano has taught me discipline or anything like that. It's just like, hey, here's a time I remember playing. Here's the thing I played. Here's what I like to play now. I think is a perfect hobby description here. So good job with that. So we get to the end, and I'm confused about your clinical roles, and so I question what's going on. Do you have experience? Do you not have experience? You have a little bit here. What's going on? You have some potential shadowing here, but you mark it as medical clinical. You don't have any standalone shadowing.
Mm-hmm.
And I bet you, I'm not a betting man, but I bet you that you were probably filtered out from some schools based on that thing alone.
Oh, I didn't know that. I didn't know they filtered based off of like the experience type.
Why not?
I mean, I just didn't think of that as an option. Whether it's like, I just didn't think that they did that, but good to know.
Yeah.
I mean, over this past year, I've done dedicated shadowing.
Great.
So that's one thing that I've targeted to.
Good. And on your new application, did you put shadowing as its own activity?
Yes, I did. I put it.
Wonderful. Okay. Yeah. So schools have the ability to do whatever they want. They can filter based on stats. They can filter based on activity hours. They can filter based on whatever they want. Right? They get all of the data points, and then their software, they can filter, sort, cut whatever, however they want. I was talking to a Harvard, she was a medical student, but she was on the admissions committee as a medical student. And she specifically said they won't look at applications with no shadowing hours.
Oh, okay.
So it's a thing. Now it's going to be very school dependent, and obviously one set of rules doesn't fit every admissions committee, every medical school out there. But in broad terms, you want to make sure you have the stats necessary, right? I always talk about good enough, and yours obviously 4.0521 are good enough. That's not closing any doors for you. But when a school has the ability to say, hey, show me students who have more than a 3.2, show me students who have more than a 5.05, show me students who have at least 5 shadowing hours, show me students who have at least 50 clinical hours. Okay, great. This is my student, right? These are the 3,000 students we're going to actually look at. And then your application here with amazing stats and no shadowing listed in terms of its own discrete category, you potentially would have gotten filtered out at some schools. Now, can we say that for sure? No, but potentially, right? All right, so let's go back to here. We finished with piano. So activity-wise, again, confusion around clinical, confusion around some rules, missing a little bit of you, no shadowing. So activities for you potentially being an issue. We get
one. Sorry, I have one question about the activities. So, with the clinic coordinator, medical assistant, scribe, this new application cycle, I kind of split it into two because I recognize that it's admin and then also like clinical. Is that an okay approach?
Definitely. Although it's funny because you basically told me your clinical coordinator job was being a medical assistant and scribe. So you're telling me two different things.
No, what I meant by that was, I mean, a lot of what I do as a medical assistant is admin work, right?
Okay.
So that's kind of
okay. So not necessarily MA work as in checking in the patients, taking vitals, kind of getting their note started with kind of a chief complaint, but actually more the admin work, medical assistant role. Yes,
correct. I kind of encompass a lot of what a medical assistant does. So both that, like running the actual clinic with patients coming in, and the back end work.
Okay. And so did you split the scribe work and medical assistant work, and you mark them both as clinical experience, or did you mark one as non-clinical?
No. So I marked one of them as non-clinical. I think I named that like clinic lead or whatever. the role was named, and then the medical clinical was to medical assistant and scribe, which focus on purely like patient interaction.
Perfect. Yeah, and it's just clearer, right? There's more clarity in who you are and what your role is and what you're doing. So I think perfect way to separate those and show, like, I had this role, definitely not clinical. I had these roles, definitely clinical, and I'm going to talk about them separately.
Got it.
As long as you're not double dipping the hours, that's perfectly fine. All right. We get to personal statement, and you'll notice I actually don't have anything written until the very end, which is pretty good. So let's just look through. Let's look through and talk about this. So you have this story about your grandmother. A crack of light from the door shined weakly on my grandma in a dim hospital room. So very showing right off the bat. I'm like, okay, good. You know how to show. She was propped up by numerous pillows. Her body shifted to one side. He sat next to her on the cold metal stools. So again, very, very showing. Good writing here. The food tray lay across. You gave her some mushy rice, cloudy, starchy water. Again, very showing. Maybe a little bit too much, but I'm not going to complain about that at this point. You embraced your grandmother, held her extra tight. She was having surgery the next day and worried about what was going to happen, right? Would she be able to walk? Would she even be there? And then you stepped over the little curb of the doorstep that she had tripped over. So you're giving context to what happened. So right off the bat, I'm like, oh, this is really good. I can see what's going on. I can see you being very caring and compassionate for your grandmother, bringing her her favorite meal of porridge, or not necessarily her favorite meal, but at least something you know she'll eat. That night, you felt an odd emptiness in the house. In the morning, the clinking and banging of the pots and pans were strikingly absent. Okay, great. I generally, and this is more of a style thing than anything you really need to do, but for me, when I get to an end of a paragraph for the personal statement, I'm like, okay, why did I just read this? And I don't get that with yours. And so I personally am a little disappointed because I'm like, okay, I just read a bunch, but I don't know why I read it, so I guess I'll keep going. So then we get to counting down the minutes. So you're at school, you're like, okay, the bell's ringing, you go to mom's car, you're going to the hospital, to grandma's room. Grandma's hip replacement was successful. She should expect a full recovery. Great. And then you get to the impact, right? In one operation, surgeon was able to kickstart my grandma's journey to recovery, ease the worries that lingered in the household. It looks like maybe there's a typo there, in the household, lingered the household. The surgeon's impact on my grandma, my family, and I was the catalyst that inspired me to explore a career as a physician. So you have this impact in saying, hey, this was a seed. This is my initial journey to explore, and here's why. So you put your why at the beginning, right? The impact that the physician had, and here's what it led to. So I think at the end, I read this and I go, great, good seed, got it. I understand your start here. The only question I have is that the context of where you are in your life. Obviously, you're still in school. You mention high school here, but that doesn't mean you're in high school. Maybe you're in middle school and you just think high school is the kind of the pinnacle of graduations. And so maybe potentially, I don't think I saw any sort of like as a 16-year-old or as a 15-year-old, whatever, to give a little bit of context there. But good seed, right? So I understand your initial exposure. And then you talk here about seeking out opportunities. Among these were caring for Nancy, and the physical therapist and I found her with her head cocked to the side. You performed passive range of motion. The physical therapist searched for a response by asking Nancy to squeeze his hand. And so we're talking about a physical therapy role, which I'm assuming is coming from this activity here where you talk about physical therapy. And so I'm wondering why I'm reading about physical therapy when you want to be a physician.
Yeah.
Why'd you talk about this?
Yeah. Well, kind of two reasons. The first reason was within this internship, the physical therapy department was actually the one where you got the most clinical exposure. You would basically shadow the physical therapist and go from room to room, whereas for other ones, you don't get that kind of experience going from room to room to patients. So that's why I was in that department. And this is where I had kind of my most impactful patient interaction during that time. And that really pushed me towards wanting to be a physician, specifically like having a higher scope of practice, going through all that schooling and all that experience. And so that's why I talked about this.
Yeah.
Even though it was in a physical therapy.
But you already told me you wanted to be a doctor.
Yeah, so that's definitely not clear. I think in my new personal statement, I made it a bit more clear by kind of combining these two because they both were really impactful towards my path towards medicine and then being a physician specifically.
Okay.
So I think the seed with my grandma was more of wanting to be in the healthcare field. And then as I explored more and more, I kind of narrowed my options down. Okay. So that's the new take that I kind of took on it. I think I probably jumped the gun looking back that my grandma pushed me to be a physician.
Yeah. And that's the perfect reflection on that, because I try to have students remember the seed, at least in the fake made up world of the personal statement book, is the exploration of healthcare, not, ooh, I knew I wanted to be a doctor then. Right. And so, and obviously your grandma's having hip surgery. She's going to have lots of physical therapy that goes with that. So you're exposed to that as well, obviously, but you don't talk about it here. So my assumption is you really did want to be a physician from this first exposure with your grandmother. And then I just am confused. Why are we talking about physical therapy and wishing there were more you could have done? Because obviously, if you want to be a doctor and you're just having patients wiggle their toes, of course you want to do more, right? Mm-hmm. And so we get to one of the things you said earlier about showing more of you. This specific example, it's a hard example because there's really no interaction, right? You have potentially someone who's in some sort of coma / vegetative state / whatever, who's obviously severely brain injured, and you're doing some passive range of motion stuff, but there's really no interaction between the two, right? It's just you doing things. So not the best, most impactful story here, especially with the confusion of, I want to be a doctor. Ooh, I was with a physical therapist. I want to be a doctor. I'm like, wait, you already told me you want to be a doctor. Okay. All right. So you pursue some work as a medical assistant and scribe at a neurosurgery practice. You're with Ava, developmental delay patient, and removing some staples. And I think this was a decent story, right? You're kind of showing what's going on. You are nervous because it's the first time you're taking out staples alone, and that interaction and listening to music and being at ease. And so I think a lot of that story, there's some interaction there, which helps. I highlighted here, Ava's resilience despite her disabilities pushed me to aspire for more. I caution students with this sort of sentiment. There's a really good, if you Google it, it's a really good article basically saying my disability is not your inspiration, right? And so using someone's disability like you have here of like, ooh, she's disabled and that's inspiring for me. It's just something to think about. A lot of people in the disabled community may not like that. Like, I'm just who I am. Why is that inspiring for you, right? So just be careful with that sort of language, and I'll leave it at that. But overall, I think this did a good job of showing that interaction, showing you're caring for the person, showing some empathy there. You put here for reflection, I want to one day be in a position where I could care for Ava more than just removing her staples. I'm trying to have students get away from this kind of do more kind of reflection, because it's obvious you want to do more. You're saying you want to be a doctor. Of course, being just a medical assistant, being just a scribe, being just a whatever is not going to be enough, because you're telling me you want to be a doctor. So that would make sense. So trying to have students get a little more specific there. And then, so decent story there. Good. And then I wrote here for this conclusion, my experiences thus far have proved to me that a career as a physician is the path I want to take. Very generic statement. Don't need that kind of stuff. Hopefully all of the paragraphs leading up to this point have shown that already. And so just one more statement saying that. Students either do this one, or they'll do, I'm sure this is what I want to do, or they'll say, I'm ready to do this. Like all of those kind of statements we don't need. They don't really help. And then you have here, I see my grandma in every patient I've encountered. I see my own fear and worry reflected in their families. So a little callback to your grandmother, I think, is just a distraction we don't necessarily need. It's not helping me understand more about who you are. I have experienced firsthand the powerful impact a physician can have, how anxiety and worry can turn into relief and hope. Again, that's just, you're just paraphrasing what you've already told me. So again, the first 3 sentences here probably aren't needed and are just fluff sentences. And then this last sentence, a physician's role in providing hope and solutions for a patient and their family is what drives me to embark on this journey. I think you could reword that a little bit more to say, like, you want to provide hope and solutions versus generically a physician can do this. So for conclusions being very big, being very aspirational, here's what I hope to accomplish. Here's how I hope to impact my patients. Something that I tell students to think about, not necessarily write specifically, but think about in terms of conclusions is, how do you want your patients to remember you? When you retire, right? And not necessarily say like, on my retirement day, I hope they remember me in this way, but just a thought process to get to where you want to go. So I get to the end of your personal statement. I go, okay, I have this great seed with grandma. How's grandma doing, by the way?
She's doing great. She's actually, she's visiting now from Thailand.
Good.
So.
That's awesome. So grandma's doing great with her hip. Hopefully we evened out that door sill, so there's no tripping hazard there anymore. You have this great seed. You have this exploration. There's some confusion with that next paragraph about physical therapy versus medicine. So I'm taking it back a little bit. We have the Nancy story and doing more. It's okay. Not super great. Again, not a ton of interaction. We have the Ava story, which is really strong to help show who you are. And then kind of a weak conclusion kind of fizzles out here at the end. So not a horrible personal statement, not an amazing personal statement. It's a so-so personal statement. And a lot of times so-so personal statements do the job. They do enough. But I get to your activities as a whole with some confusion around the activities. Is it clinical? Is it not clinical? What is your role? What's going on? No specific shadowing experience. And then a so-so personal statement potentially leading to a lot of questions and concerns like, who are you? And then on top of secondaries taking a long time to turn around, I think leads to only 2 interviews with a 4.0 and a 521, especially having some decent activities. Right? The far majority of students who I talk to who have a 4.0, who have 520 plus MCAT scores, don't have any clinical experience. And you have a ton, it's just confusing. Mm-hmm. You don't have shadowing listed specifically. You do have it as kind of a separate clinical experience / shadowing activity, but potentially some schools didn't even get the chance to look at that. So some questions around that.
One of the things that this cycle I focused on a lot more was going deeper in that reflection and not being so general, but being more like specific, like what I want to do. Yeah, I got feedback from one school that I applied to, and that's kind of what they told me to, like, I went through a personal statement and got to the conclusion, and then now what? Like, what do you want to do?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's where I go with the aspirations. What are you hoping to do? What are you hoping to accomplish? Right? The question that I love answering, the question that the school is subconsciously asking you is, okay, I'm going to give you a degree. I'm going to give you this piece of paper that says you have the education and training necessary to take care of patients. How are you going to go out and be a good representation of this degree that has our school name on it? Right? And so for a reflection, for conclusion, that's where I want students to think really big aspirationally, the big, hairy, audacious goal kind of thinking in terms of, hey, school, like, I'm really going to represent you well. Obviously, it's generic because it's in a personal statement, so you can't talk to one school unless you're only applying to one school. But in general, here's how I'm going to be a good advocate for patients, a good practitioner, etc.
Okay, got it.
Right.
Yeah, I think that's definitely what I focused more on this cycle.
Okay, so let's look at schools. So Albany, great. BU, great. Cal North State, having some accreditation issues. Hopefully that gets fixed soon. Cal University of Science and Medicine. Where are you a California resident?
Yes, I am.
Okay. So
my school is majority California.
Yeah, so we get to the end. That's where all the California schools are. That's perfectly fine. We have Rosalind Franklin. That's great. Columbia, obviously, great school. Drexel, Duke, great school. GW, Georgetown, Hackensack. Obviously, some big heavy hitters here with Harvard, Mount Sinai. We have some other California schools, NYU, free med school. Why not? Your school list looks great to me. I don't think your school list is weighted too heavily. It's always SDN and Reddit are like, oh, you applied to too many top 20 schools. I'm like, top 20 according to the stupid U.S. News and World Reports, which doesn't mean anything. But yeah, I think your school list is perfectly fine.
Okay.
Yeah, just some confusion, some more clarity around who you are, what your roles are, and a little bit more about the why medicine in personal statement, being a little clearer there. I think you're right on the precipice. And so just another good example of 4.0, 521, right? Can't get much better. What is that? 97th percentile, 98th percentile. MCAT score, just not always being enough. There has to be a little bit more. And whether specifically for you, we could just throw out all my advice here with your activities and personal statement and none of that mattered and was only the delay in the secondaries, we'll never know the answer, right? And so it's just a matter of, I can only provide you with what I see physically, and whether the internal workings of that admissions committee were like, you took a month to submit a secondary, that's just not good enough for us. I don't care how good your stats are, we'll never know. And so the only thing that you can do is do as best as you can do at every step of the way. Have the best activities that you think tells your story. Have the best personal statement that you think tells your story, whether that's in my style or not. And get those secondaries in as fast as possible. So as we're recording this at the beginning of June, secondaries haven't started rolling out yet. And so you should get off this call and go and work on your secondary essays as much as possible. Yeah, good.
Yeah.
And really just start at your top choice schools and just work down from there so that when those interview or when those secondary essay requests come back, at least for those top choice schools, you're turning them within a day or two. So,
yeah.
Good.
Yeah, that's what I've been doing ever since I submitted last week. I've just been writing secondaries.
Good.
Yeah, I think last cycle really taught me pre-writing is pretty important.
Yeah, and so I think last time you said you couldn't pre-write because you had started a full-time job. Is that right? Yeah.
I was working. I started my full-time job June and then all the way through July and August. So I didn't have time to pre-write. I didn't have much time to write as the secondaries were coming into. Okay. But that's why pretty much all of them developed.
Okay.
from
And now you have some more time management skills and understand the importance of those secondary
yes.
essays, so you don't come back from work and go, okay, what's on Netflix? And you're like, nope, it's secondary essay time.
Yeah.
Awesome. Any questions for me?
No, I think you offered some insight that I haven't heard before, especially with the shadowing and stuff. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Good luck.
Thank you.